you guys? It's Sequoia, your Silicon Valley tech editor, and we have a very special situation today because I am on the West Coast, but I'm chiming in with my girl, Selena Hill, the digital editor of Black Enterprise, who is on the East Coast in New York.
Yeah, I'm freezing. I'm freezing in this office. Yeah.
I feel it.
You look bright, like sunshine in California. I'm just like,
we get the best of both worlds.
Right, basically.
Cool. So we both have podcasts. I have BE the Code. Selena has her podcast, which she's going to dive a little bit deeper into. But everybody's been asking, how do you start a podcast? A podcast? So we're going to dive deep into that and give you guys a little bit of gems, some tools, as to how you go about actually starting and launching and getting your podcast out to the masses. Ready?
Absolutely. So, Sequoia, you started BE the Code for Black Enterprise. Tell us exactly how you started this.
So what's interesting about the way that I started a podcast, so I wasn't even familiar with the podcast world like that. I was just like, I know that I watch The Breakfast Club, the way that they have the video element of how they put out their content, they turn that into podcasts. So I think that was super interesting. Or like radio shows, which are essentially podcasts, right? So I thought that was super interesting. And I used to work in radio. So coming from radio like many moons ago, I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is the same thing as being in radio.
Right.
So, yeah, I started to hear that hype about, okay, now the podcast is a new thing. So I was like, let me just try it. So I actually called an old friend who I worked with in LA in radio. And I was like, hey, you have a studio, right? And he was like, yeah, come through. So we went over, me and a guest, that I was like, okay, let's pull together guests, because you don't have to start with guests right away. So that's the one thing that people have to understand is like, guests are great because they help, obviously you guys can vibe off of each other, but if you have a topic that you want to talk about right away, forget the guests. Like, pull up your laptop if you don't have access. Like, obviously I had access to a radio station with like professional recording equipment, all of these things, right? But if you don't have all that, you can literally pull up your laptop, grab an inexpensive microphone off of Amazon.com or anywhere else and hook that thing in and just start recording. Like, pull up some recording software. You can do that through pretty much any platform. You can do it through QuickTime. You can do it like however you want to do it. And just start the process. I think that's the hardest part, just starting. Wouldn't you say?
No, absolutely, Sequoia. And it's so funny that you mentioned radio because I've been doing radio since college, and I do it professionally on every Sunday. So I do a weekly show on an FM station as well as Ustream. And then one of my co-hosts a few years ago was like, we really need to get into the podcast world, as you mentioned, because it is just blooming. And so now we transition our show into podcasts every single week, and we use SoundCloud.
Mm-hmm.
So we record in a professional studio, and then we translate that into, sometimes we break it down into individual clips or interviews, or sometimes we just upload one whole podcast episode right onto SoundCloud. And we're also on iTunes and Stitcher and Google Play. But
that's
like
dope.
You said, sometimes you just have to do it because a lot of times people think like just because I'm in the studio doesn't necessarily mean like my sound quality is better or superb than you doing it at home in a quiet room with some really good equipment.
Right.
So I would tell people, don't even be dismayed. If you have a lot to say and you have a particular focus, and let's say you already have a following on social media, then you can go for it and launch a podcast just like that.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting too is a lot of, like you said, SoundCloud and all of the other platforms that you can have those channels of distribution. Like you said, you worked in radio. When you were working in radio, you had to wait for somebody actually to distribute your content. Like these days, you are the distribution channel. Like you decide if I'm going to put out content on Tuesday and Thursday, you get to make that decision. So I think that we're in a world now where we have that freedom that we didn't have like 5-10 years back, where we had to wait on somebody to give us the green light. And now we don't. We can do that on our own. So that's super exciting to me. So go ahead.
Absolutely, Sequoia. And I just wanted to add on that I think that, once you really start building up a following with your podcast and being your own distributor, like using social media to get your stuff out there and to develop a following that centers around the podcast, then what I would suggest for other people to do is maybe you want to get into a larger podcast network. There are a number of podcast networks that's out there, from Gimlet to I think it's Loudspeakers Network, where a lot of celebrities, this is what they use to distribute their podcast. So of course you should do it on your own, but if you can build a following and a subscription base, then you can pitch it to larger podcast networks, and that will definitely increase your listenership.
I agree 100%. But you have to be consistent. I think that's the biggest thing. Absolutely. Is people start something and they get all excited about it, and then all of a sudden you have like episode, and then it's like, it's like no one hears from you again. So in terms of consistency, we would do like with BE the Code, we did like once a week, and then we started moving into more like structured kind of I would say episodes that really didn't have to do with the podcast. So we're a little guilty of falling off on the consistency train, but we will be back around with a little bit more structure. But yeah, I would say that consistency is probably the number one thing to keeping your audience, right? Like, how often do you put out your content?
Every single week. We record every Sunday, and we release our new podcast every Tuesday. And it's consistent. We've been consistent for a few years now, and it's consistent because, again, we're a radio show first that is just now entering into the podcast lane. So we hold ourselves accountable because we have like our radio obligations. Like, we pay a fee to record that show every week. So we're definitely gonna do it. We definitely show up. But yeah, I think that like if you're starting off by yourself, then you're gonna have to hold yourself accountable because like you said, Sequoia, being consistent is a key. And especially if your content is really good, like you're gonna have people wanting to hear more. Like
right.
I've seen some of your podcasts. I've watched them because you do the video version as well, and you show those little clips, and they're really good.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Like I said, we will be back. We will be back. But I will say this. I think just to kind of wrap this all up, I think the number one thing, obviously, is just start. Make sure you're consistent. And then also utilizing those social media channels. So where do you think that you get the most traffic in terms of your channel distribution?
Probably Twitter for us. Because we tend to talk a lot about social issues and politics. And because Black Twitter is such like an entity and a force in itself.
So much.
We use that, but don't get me wrong, we also promote on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we also promote from our individual personal accounts. So there's a lot of promotion, and like if we get over 100 views on one episode, we're winning.
Yeah.
You have to utilize every platform, I think.
Yeah. I agree 1,000%. Well, this is great. I think we've given them some gems. They know how to at least get started, get out there. Like you said, stay consistent, use those social media channels, get on those. I mean, networks, obviously, you have to build up to a certain audience and a certain following, but don't get discouraged about that. Jump on your SoundCloud, jump on your iTunes. We set it up through Black Enterprise for free, so you didn't even have to pay that. So there's so many opportunities to get out there. Just do the work, I would say. That's how I would end it. What about you?
Yeah, I would say do the research, do the work, come up with a clear, structured plan, and make sure it's feasible so that you can remain committed. Maybe you want to do a podcast once a month starting off. I think that's better than trying to do it every week and falling off. Cut yourself a break and realize that it's definitely going to be a lot of trial and error, especially because this is a new industry almost, and like this is brand new to you, but you can do it. Just be structured about it and definitely plan.
Beautiful. Well, thanks, Selena, for hanging out with me from the New York offices.
Yep, we're here. Continue to enjoy the West Coast.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And hopefully you guys got some gems so you guys can get started.